Snow clung to the edges of the military compound, blanketing the ground in muted white. Every crunch of boots on frost-laden asphalt echoed like a drumbeat in the empty corridors between buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a flag flapped lazily against the gray sky, but even it seemed subdued, as if it sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. The general moved briskly, his polished boots striking against the frozen ground with authority, his gaze sweeping over the rows of soldiers standing at attention. Pride and power radiated from him, a tangible force that demanded acknowledgement. He had always believed that respect was earned through rank, medals, and visibility. But today, something beyond the surface waited to challenge his assumptions, though he did not yet know it. Across the courtyard, she stood silent, motionless, almost as if she were part of the architecture itself. The long, black barrel of her M82 rested lightly against her shoulder. Her gloved hands adjusted the scope, though the gesture was casual, almost absent-minded. Her eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, swept over the perimeter with measured calm, tracking threats that no one else could perceive. The world saw a lone soldier, a figure in camouflage, nothing remarkable, no medals glinting in the weak winter sun. But the insignia on her chest, small, subtle, unassuming, told a story that the general would soon realize was impossible to ignore. Around her, others moved like ghosts. Soldiers murmured behind closed doors, officers shuffled papers, yet no one dared break the spell of her stillness. She carried the weight of battles fought in silence, losses that no one else had witnessed, and victories so quiet they were almost invisible. Her back was straight, her jaw firm, yet her eyes carried the shadow of grief, a grief born not of fear, but of memories that refused to fade. Her name was Major Elise Harper, a sniper whose reputation had preceded her only in whispers. To the military elite, she was an anomaly. A woman in a sphere that rarely noticed, rarely appreciated, and often dismissed those who did not fit their narrow expectations. But she had never needed recognition. Her satisfaction had always been in precision, in duty, in keeping others safe from a distance while remaining unseen. The price she had paid was immense. Friends she had saved still remembered her face, but the world largely had forgotten the battles she had fought and the lives she had spared. She had arrived at the base under a cloud of indifference. Rumors had reached the upper echelons, a sniper capable of extraordinary accuracy, yet one whose gender seemed to some a disqualifier for visibility. The whispers followed her like shadows. She is skilled, yes, but not conventional. Not what a general expects. She knew them. She had always known them, and she had endured it all with a quiet dignity that few could comprehend. As the general passed within 10 meters, his eyes briefly scanned the soldiers aligned in rigid formation. He nodded at some, overlooked others, his expression unreadable. And then his gaze fell on her. For a moment nothing happened. She did not flinch, did not break posture. Her breathing remained calm, measured, her finger lightly brushing the edge of her rifle, as if she were aware of a world far beyond the courtyard, a world only she could perceive. But his eyes caught the insignia pinned above her chest, small, gleaming, unmistakable. A sniper unit pin, reserved for those who had demonstrated lethal precision and unwavering courage under fire. The general froze. His boot paused mid-step. Time seemed to bend around that moment. Every murmuring voice in the courtyard fell silent. He knew immediately that he had underestimated the weight of what stood before him. The one he had ignored, the one he had passed by without a second glance, carried a history of valor that no rank could confer, a legacy written not in awards, but in action, in sacrifice, in the silent courage of someone who had stared death in the eyes and walked away untouched. Elise's eyes did not soften. She did not smile. She simply held her ground. The air between them was heavy with unsaid acknowledgement, with respect that had been denied for far too long. In that moment, the courtyard did not belong to the general. It belonged to her, and the weight of her unspoken achievements settled over every observer like an invisible mantle. Around the perimeter, bystanders began to whisper, a murmur of recognition passing through the ranks like wind through dry leaves. They had all sensed it, felt it, but no one had dared speak it aloud. And now, faced with the undeniable proof of her accomplishments, the general understood the magnitude of what he had ignored. Her calmness was more powerful than any argument, any proclamation of rank. It was the quiet dignity of a soldier who had lived through battles that no one else could fathom. She did not need to prove herself with words or gestures. Her presence alone carried the weight of experience, discipline, and unyielding moral clarity. In those few seconds, the courtyard transformed. What had been a space of rigid hierarchy and assumed authority became a place of humility. The general's pride faltered, replaced with a dawning comprehension. The lesson was brutal and immediate. True respect is not commanded by rank or position. It is earned through courage, through silent sacrifice, and through an unwavering commitment to duty, even when no one watches. Elise lowered her rifle slightly, not in submission, but in quiet assurance. She had not sought recognition, nor had she expected it. And yet, in that moment, the recognition came not as a gift, but as a necessary acknowledgement of truth. The general's shoulders slumped slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if a weight he had never known was suddenly upon him. Around him, other officers began to glance at her with a new awareness, a flicker of respect mingled with disbelief. And yet, she remained untouched by the sudden attention. Serene in her solitude, a figure of unassailable composure. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The silence carried all the emotion of decades of struggle, of injustice endured and victories won without applause. And in that silence, the first seeds of understanding were planted, a recognition that would ripple outward, eventually touching every corner of the base, every heart that had been blind to her courage. Elise had not always carried herself with this quiet command. Once, she had been a young soldier, eyes wide with idealism, heart full of a desire to make a difference. She had enlisted not for medals or recognition, but because she had felt the sting of helplessness when those she loved were caught in the crossfire of events beyond their control. Her earliest memories of combat were a cruel teacher. The first time she fired her rifle in anger, it was not with pride, but with the trembling knowledge that a life depended on her skill. She remembered the weight of that realization pressing into her chest, making her feel every heartbeat as though it were a drum of judgment. The air had smelled of smoke and sweat, the ground slick with the aftermath of chaos, and yet she had found herself calm in the eye of the storm, an unspoken promise to those around her that she would not fail them. In the early missions, comrades had laughed at her in the mess hall, not out of malice, at least not always, but out of disbelief. A woman sniper, they whispered, soft and doubtful. Could she handle the strain of long-range precision, the patience to wait for the perfect moment? Could she endure the loneliness of being the unseen protector, the shadow who ensured the safety of her team while remaining invisible? Elise had endured their doubts with a careful smile, never challenging them, letting her results speak in silence. And the results had spoken. In Afghanistan, she had neutralized threats that had threatened entire convoys. In Iraq, she had saved entire villages from ambush. She remembered every face she had seen flash in terror and relief, and every life she had taken to preserve 10 others. Each bullet fired had been a moral calculation, a balance between necessity and conscience, and each night she had lain awake, fingers tracing the scars that life had etched into her soul. But it was not only the battlefield that had carved her. Elise had lost people she loved. Fellow soldiers who had trusted her with their lives, friends who had joked beside her, and shared dreams in quiet moments, had been taken in ways that were violent, cruel, and utterly senseless. She carried their absence like a second skin, an ache that would never fully fade. She had learned to mask her sorrow with serenity, to move through the world with calm composure, but the grief never left. It was a companion, not an enemy. Her training had been relentless. Early mornings spent in bitter cold, nights spent lying in mud, listening to the faintest rustle that might signify danger. Her senses had been honed until they were instruments of life, saving precision. She could feel the tremor in a leaf, the whisper of a footstep, the shift of a body 50 meters away. And yet, for all her skill, she had known the sting of being undervalued, of having her expertise questioned, simply because of the shape of her body or the pitch of her voice. She had learned that the world did not always honor skill. Sometimes it rewarded arrogance and visibility. And so she had become invisible by choice, not because she lacked desire or passion, but because invisibility was power. She had learned that the silent observer could wield more influence than the one who demanded attention. She had embraced the solitude of her role, finding comfort in precision control and the knowledge that her actions, though unseen, saved lives every day. Elise remembered a night in Kandahar, years ago, when her team had been ambushed during a routine reconnaissance mission. She had crawled for hours through dust and blood, repositioning her rifle, calculating trajectories, and coordinating through hand signals. By dawn, the enemy had been neutralized and her team was alive. The commanding officer had congratulated her, briefly, but within hours. She had been assigned to another mission, another challenge, as if her life had been nothing more than a tool for efficiency. No accolades, no public recognition. Only the quiet assurance that lives had been saved because she had endured. It was this endurance, the ability to remain steadfast, to carry pain, grief, and moral responsibility silently, that had brought her to the courtyard on that cold winter morning. Every discipline, every scar, every sleepless night, and every moment of personal sacrifice had converged to create the figure that now held the general's attention. The M82 she carried was an extension of herself. Not merely a weapon, but a symbol of the vigilance and precision that had defined her life. And yet, beneath the calm, there was always a pulse of anger. Anger at injustice, at dismissiveness, at the countless moments when her worth had been questioned, minimized, or ignored. She carried it with dignity, never outwardly, but it sharpened her focus, made her resolve absolute. It was a fire that did not consume, but clarified, illuminating her purpose and sharpening every decision. Her colleagues, those who truly understood, revered her silently. A glance, a nod, a small gesture was enough to communicate trust, to signal that she had their back in a way no one else could. She had become a guardian not of territory, but of human life, of moral responsibility, of unspoken truths that the world often overlooked. And now, as the general froze, as whispers spread, Elise Harper was not just a soldier in uniform. She was every sacrifice unacknowledged, every life saved in silence, every moment of courage that had gone unnoticed. The courtyard itself seemed to sense the weight of her presence, the slow gravity of recognition settling in as the snow fell quietly around her. She was still, but alive with unspoken power. She did not need words. Her history, her discipline, her grief, and her triumph spoke for themselves. And those who had doubted her were being forced to confront a truth they had long ignored, that greatness does not always announce itself, and true courage often resides in those who remain unseen until the moment that demands acknowledgement. The general straightened, trying to mask the sudden tremor of recognition that had passed over him. He was a man trained to command, to inspire obedience, and yet, for the first time in decades, he felt a subtle doubt creep into his awareness. Standing before Elise Harper, he realized that rank and medals were powerless against the truth that radiated from her presence. Around them, the courtyard remained tense. Soldiers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the general and the sniper, who had silently arrested his authority without a single word. Officers whispered behind their hands, uneasy with the imbalance of power now evident in plain sight. Some tried to assert dominance with strict stances and curt nods, but even their gestures faltered. It was as if the very air had changed, thickened by the quiet force that Elise exuded. The general's assistant, a young lieutenant who had admired his superior's decisive demeanor, approached with a paper in hand, a report that might have commanded attention in any other circumstance. But here, it seemed trivial, inconsequential. He faltered mid-step, sensing the silent authority in Elise that made any attempt at command seem almost foolish. Elise, for her part, remained unmoved. She did not turn her gaze to the general, did not shift her weight. Her fingers rested lightly on the rifle's stock, her posture relaxed yet precise. She had long ago learned that true power does not announce itself through aggression. It announces itself through restraint, patience, and the quiet knowledge of capability. But the injustice in the ranks was palpable. She had seen it countless times. The young officer passed over for a promotion because of gender. The veteran ignored in favor of a more polished, but less competent peer. The silent hero relegated to shadows while others claimed the accolades. She knew the machinery of recognition well, and she had learned to navigate it without compromise. The general, for all his experience, had underestimated her. It was not her skill that startled him. He had heard the whispers of her reputation, but the moral weight it carried. Every life saved, every mission completed flawlessly, every sacrifice endured in silence, it all culminated in a force that could not be ignored. And yet, the system that surrounded them still hesitated to acknowledge it. Elise had learned that silence was her ally. The world rushed to shout, to assert, to demand. She had learned to observe, to measure, to act only when the moment required it. In this courtyard, in the frost-laden air, her silence became a weapon more potent than any orders or speeches. It created a vacuum, a space that demanded attention simply by refusing to conform to expectation. Officers began to murmur. Some felt guilt, others irritation. How did we overlook this? One whispered, voice tinged with unease. She has done what? Another shook his head, caught between admiration and shame. The whispers swirled, a storm of recognition that had no outlet because it was not yet sanctioned by the formal channels. The general took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. He had always relied on formal acknowledgement to validate courage medals, ribbons, commendations. But here, before him, the history of Valor could not be condensed into paper or ceremony. It existed in presence, in posture, in the quiet intensity of a woman who had dedicated her life to saving others at the cost of her own recognition. Anger rose briefly in him, not at Elise, but at the system, at himself. At every moment he had failed to see what was obvious. He realized that the machinery of command often blinds even the most observant to the quiet truths before them. He had walked past her, unthinking, because he had been trained to look for loud declarations of competence, not the subtle, indelible marks of silent heroism. Elise felt none of his guilt. She had learned long ago that others' understanding, or lack thereof, was not her burden. She remained poised, carrying herself with the unshakable dignity of someone who had survived storms, both literal and metaphorical. Her power was not in recognition but in action, in preparedness, in the unflinching acceptance of responsibility. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers and officers alike sensed that something extraordinary had occurred, yet no one dared speak. The general's face betrayed a mixture of respect and incredulity. Recognition, he now understood, could not be demanded, it had to be earned, and he had witnessed the culmination of decades of earned respect compressed into a single, undeniable moment. Yet, the tension was far from resolved. Around Elise, the silent network of her past missions and alliances waited in the wings. The sniper unit she had been part of, the men and women who understood precision, discipline, and honor, stood ready, though unseen. Their presence was a quiet promise that injustice, however entrenched, could not persist indefinitely. Elise's eyes remained calm, but there was a flicker, a subtle tightening of the jaw, that suggested anticipation. She had learned that patience was more potent than anger, and observation more powerful than protest. And in that patience, she held the key to a shift that would challenge assumptions, correct oversights, and confront arrogance without confrontation. In the shadows of the courtyard, bystanders began to feel a profound unease. Those who had dismissed her, ignored her, or failed to notice her contribution suddenly sensed the depth of what they had overlooked. There was sorrow, regret, and a subtle thrill of anticipation. Something was about to change, and the change would not be loud or brash, it would be undeniable, rooted in morality and precision. For Elise, this was familiar territory. She had waited for years for recognition, not through spectacle, but through consequence. Every silent mission, every careful calculation, every act of courage unaccompanied by applause had prepared her for this. And now, the system that had failed her, the individuals who had overlooked her, would witness firsthand the quiet, inexorable power of a life lived in disciplined honor. The general finally moved forward again, slowly this time, aware that the balance of authority had subtly shifted. Each step was deliberate, measured, weighed against the revelation of what he had ignored. Around him, others mirrored his uncertainty. For the first time, protocol and rank were secondary to truth and moral gravity. The rules of recognition had been rewritten in silence, through presence, through unwavering resolve. And through it all, Elise remained motionless, embodying the paradox of absolute control and complete calm. She had become a mirror to the system's failures, reflecting back its own shortcomings, yet offering no condemnation, only a silent insistence on acknowledgement. It was a moral stand, executed without words, without protest, without complaint. And that is what made it unassailable. She had turned injustice into a canvas for dignity, and in doing so, she had forced the powerful to confront truths they could no longer ignore. The general had walked past her, yet every step he took seemed to echo back the weight of unacknowledged truth. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the story written in her posture, the history etched into her eyes, with the formal reports and protocols that had always defined his authority. Recognition had been withheld for far too long. And yet it arrived now not through ceremony or speech, but through the undeniable gravity of presence. Elise remained a figure of unbroken composure. She did not shift, did not plead, did not offer explanation. The snow fell around her like a veil, soft and silent, and yet it framed her with a quiet majesty. Every observer, officers, soldiers, staff, felt the gravity of her being. They had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time. The realization left them unsettled. But this was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, the network of the sniper unit, comrades who had trained alongside her, fought beside her, and trusted her with their lives, was already in motion. Elise's reputation had not been a secret. Those who understood precision and sacrifice knew her worth, and they recognized that a system had failed to honor her fully. Messages were sent discreetly, calling attention to overlooked missions, uncredited victories, and acts of valor that had quietly saved countless lives. Reports were filed, testimonies collected, each detail a quiet drumbeat, leading toward the inevitable acknowledgement that had been delayed for too long. The weight of unseen allies added to the tension in the courtyard, though none of the general's officers understood the scope of it yet. Elise felt nothing but calm. Patience had always been her ally. She knew the power of presence, the precision of timing, and the inevitability of truth. The general might have authority in title, but she carried authority in consequence. Each mission, each act of disciplined courage, was a testament that could not be erased by bureaucracy. The whispers in the courtyard grew. Officers glanced at one another, uneasy and uncertain. They could feel that something extraordinary was unfolding, though they could not yet define it. The air seemed to pulse with anticipation, the kind that precedes revelation, and all eyes returned to her. Then, the subtle shift began. A report from an earlier operation, one that had saved a convoy from total destruction, was distributed among the officers. Names were highlighted, missions cross-referenced, evidence laid bare. Slowly, the room's atmosphere changed from unease to recognition. The general's jaw tightened as he read. He saw the indisputable record of courage, discipline, and precision. Every doubter, every critic, every whispering skeptic was rendered irrelevant in the face of irrefutable proof. Elise did not watch him struggle to reconcile his pride with truth. She had no need to. Her silence had already accomplished more than any speech could. The truth was emerging naturally, organically, like a tide that could not be resisted. A subtle nod passed between two officers near the perimeter, small, almost imperceptible, but significant. They understood that the rules of acknowledgement were being rewritten before their eyes. It was not a confrontation. It was the arrival of justice through the inevitability of merit. In that moment, the courtyard was suspended between old hierarchies and new understanding. Those who had underestimated her were forced to confront the reality that courage, skill, and sacrifice did not need applause to exist. They were written into the very air, etched in the expressions, the stance, and the presence of the woman who had been quietly extraordinary all along. Elise's eyes finally met the general's. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a calm assertion of fact. She did not demand respect. She held it because it had been earned over years of patience, hardship, and unwavering duty. The general's shoulders slumped ever so slightly. Pride and stubbornness wrestled with recognition and humility, but recognition slowly began to win. The first voice of acknowledgement came quietly, almost hesitantly. She saved hundreds during Operation Black Tide, a young lieutenant murmured. She acted alone when communication lines failed. She did what no one else could. The words were small, yet they carried weight. Other officers began to murmur in agreement, their doubts dissolving in the undeniable gravity of truth. And then, as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment, an unexpected ally emerged. A former commanding officer, long retired but respected across ranks, approached with deliberate steps. He had followed Elise's career quietly, knew her sacrifices, and understood the moral force she carried. "Major Harper," he said, voice calm but firm, "your contributions have been overlooked for too long. It is time the record reflects what your actions have already proven." The general felt a pang of discomfort. Recognition was coming not through his will, but through collective acknowledgement, through the weight of indisputable fact. Elise did not flinch, did not smile, did not react. Her dignity remained intact. The power of her silence, her unwavering patience, had created a force that could not be resisted, and now it demanded recognition. A subtle, almost sacred quiet settled over the courtyard. Soldiers straightened, officers stopped whispering, and the snow continued to fall softly, as though the world itself honored the moment. It was a silent victory, monumental not in spectacle, but in moral clarity. The general finally raised his eyes, meeting hers with a mixture of awe and humility. "I underestimated you," he admitted, voice low but carrying across the cold air. No one else dared speak. The acknowledgement was simple, yet profound. It carried the weight of every slight endured, every mission completed in solitude, and every life saved in quiet heroism. Elise's lips remained unmoved, her face serene, her eyes steady. She had achieved what she had always sought, not recognition, not applause, but justice through inevitable truth. The courtyard, the base, and those present were witnesses to a moment where merit transcended ego, and integrity triumphed over assumption. And in that silence, one could feel the echoes of countless acts of courage that had gone unseen. They were present now, not as whispers or shadows but as undeniable reality. Elise Harper had not demanded acknowledgement. She had earned it, and in doing so, had reminded every observer that true heroism does not need to announce itself, it simply is. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Snowflakes drifted lazily, settling on shoulders, rifles, and insignia as though time itself slowed to mark the moment. Elise Harper remained still, the M82 resting lightly in her hands, her gaze steady, unwavering, yet filled with the quiet intensity of someone who had endured far more than anyone could imagine. The general, now fully aware of the depth and breadth of her accomplishments, took a step forward. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost reverent. "Major Harper," he said, each word deliberate, weighted by decades of authority, the records, the testimonies, the lives saved. "It is clear you have carried a burden no one else could have. Your courage, your precision, and your unwavering resolve have been overlooked far too long." For a fleeting moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, the officers and soldiers present began to stand straighter, voices rising in quiet acknowledgement. Words were spoken softly, names and deeds recounted, the once invisible accomplishments brought into full, undeniable light. What had been disregarded, minimized, or ignored for years now stood unassailable, monumental in its moral force. Elise finally allowed herself a subtle exhale. Her lips did not curve into a smile, but her eyes softened slightly, a rare acknowledgement of relief. She did not need applause, yet the recognition was profoundly satisfying. It was not vanity she felt, but the quiet vindication of years of sacrifice endured in silence. A young lieutenant approached, hesitating, his face flushed with respect and a touch of shame. "Major, we didn't realize how much you've done. How many lives you saved." His words faltered under the weight of awe. Elise placed a gloved hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture that carried understanding, compassion, and shared pride. In that small contact, the silent transmission of wisdom and honor passed from veteran to younger soldier, a reminder that courage was contagious, even in quiet form. The general's gaze did not waver from her chest, where the sniper unit pin gleamed faintly against the winter light. He spoke again, quieter this time, but each word carried immense weight. "I walked past you, thinking I understood what command and courage looked like. I see now I was wrong." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had commanded troops across continents. But Elise did not need to reply. The moment itself spoke volumes. Presence, dignity, and earned respect were louder than words, and the silence between them carried more authority than any speech ever could. Around the perimeter, whispers rose into audible acknowledgement. Soldiers and officers recounted missions saved by her precision, acts of moral courage that had prevented catastrophe, and choices made in isolation that had safeguarded countless lives. Each story, once hidden, now found its place in the collective conscience of the base. From somewhere at the edge of the courtyard, a retired commanding officer stepped forward, voice steady and rich with conviction. "Courage does not always wear medals. Valor does not always shout. But here stands proof that excellence, sacrifice, and honor endure, even in silence." The courtyard seemed to echo with his words, carrying them across the rows of uniformed observers. Elise Harper finally lowered her rifle completely, the action subtle but profound. She did not raise her voice, did not demand applause, but the world around her shifted. The general's shoulders, once rigid with command, now slumped slightly in acknowledgement, humbled by the weight of truth. He extended a hand, a gesture symbolic yet deeply meaningful, bridging years of oversight and misunderstanding. She accepted it briefly. A silent seal of mutual recognition, forged not in words but in shared understanding of duty and sacrifice. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the whispers, the stories, the undeniable aura of moral victory. Bystanders, civilians, soldiers, and officers alike began to express admiration, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and gratitude. Some tears glistened on cheeks, unbidden, as the gravity of what had been silently endured finally found acknowledgement. And then, as if to cement the moment in memory, Elise's voice broke the silence, not loud, not demanding, but calm, deliberate, and resonant. Courage is measured not by recognition, but by the lives we protect. Honor is earned in quiet, and duty fulfilled in solitude can speak louder than applause. Her words settled over the courtyard like snow settling on cold earth. They carried conviction, moral authority, and timeless truth. And in that stillness, another voice joined her, a sergeant who had fought alongside her years before, now retired, stepping forward with pride unmistakable in his tone. "Major Harper, we have followed your lead in silence, and today, the world finally knows what we always knew. You are the standard of honor we strive to reach." The general's eyes glistened. For once ego and rank had yielded to integrity, truth, and undeniable human courage. He could offer no words more meaningful than the simple acknowledgement of the weight carried silently for years. And the courtyard responded, not with loud applause, but with a rising tide of respect, quiet nods, and solemn acknowledgement that spoke of collective recognition. Elise turned her gaze to the horizon. Feeling the cold air fill her lungs, each breath a reminder of battles survived, losses endured, and lives preserved. A lifetime of quiet heroism had culminated in this moment of undeniable justice. She did not feel pride in the conventional sense. She felt something rarer, deeper. The affirmation that courage, patience, and integrity ultimately commanded their due, even in a world slow to recognize them. The snow fell more densely now, each flake a silent witness. Soldiers straightened, civilians whispered stories, and the general, once impervious to the quiet force of her presence, now understood that leadership is incomplete without acknowledgement of the true heroes among them. She spoke once more, her voice calm and unwavering. "We serve not for recognition, but to protect, to endure, and to act when others cannot. Let this be remembered not for me, but for every unseen act of courage that has shaped the lives of others in silence." The courtyard remained still, the weight of her words settling deeply. Pride, sorrow, respect, and relief mingled in the hearts of those present. They had witnessed the validation of decades of quiet service, the recognition of a life lived with unshakable integrity, and the reminder that true heroism often resides where no one is looking. Elise Harper, once invisible, now stood as a testament to courage, patience, and honor. And the general, humbled and enlightened, knew that in passing her once with indifference, he had encountered a force far greater than himself, a quiet, unassailable power born of experience, sacrifice, and moral clarity. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a crisp, clean layer over the courtyard. The sun, weak and pale against the winter sky, reflected faintly off the polished surfaces of rifles and the insignia of soldiers' uniforms. But it was Elise Harper who captured the light, not with radiance, but with presence, the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through storms no one else could imagine and emerged with unwavering integrity. The general had stepped back, no longer a figure of unchallenged authority, but a man humbled by experience and truth. He understood, finally, that leadership is not simply the exercise of command, but the recognition and respect of those who act with courage, often unseen, often unacknowledged. Every officer, every soldier present felt it too, a subtle shift in understanding that would ripple through the base long after the moment had passed. Elise's thoughts drifted to the missions she had undertaken, the lives she had saved, the friends she had lost. She had not sought recognition, yet she had longed for justice, not for herself, but for the principle that courage, patience, and sacrifice deserved acknowledgement. Standing there, the acknowledgement was no longer abstract. It was real, it was shared, and it was quietly, unassailably powerful. She remembered faces from the past, the comrades who had fallen, the civilians whose lives she had touched, the young soldiers who now looked at her with awe and hope. Each memory was a thread woven into the fabric of who she was, a fabric strengthened by adversity, tempered by discipline, and illuminated by moral clarity. Around her, whispers of respect lingered, soft and enduring. The courtyard, once cold and indifferent, now held a warmth born not of temperature, but of shared human understanding. Soldiers straightened with pride, civilians nodded with gratitude, and even the general's posture had softened. A visible testament to humility and acknowledgement. Elise turned her gaze skyward, feeling the weight of the sniper unit pin against her chest. It was more than metal. It was the embodiment of trust, precision, and unwavering commitment. It was a symbol of the silent victories that define lives devoted to others, victories that do not require applause to exist. In that moment, she understood something profound. Heroism is not measured by the cheers of the crowd or the accolades conferred by rank. It is measured by persistence in adversity, integrity in action, and the quiet assurance that one has done all they could to protect and preserve life. Recognition may come late, it may be fleeting, but its impact is everlasting when it arrives, tempered by truth and undeniable merit. The general stepped forward once more, speaking softly, yet deliberately enough for all to hear. Major Harper, you have reminded us that courage can be silent, honor can be quiet, and duty can exist without fanfare. Today, we bear witness to the weight of true heroism. Let it guide us, inspire us, and shape the way we recognize valor in the future. She did not respond with words. Her calm, steady presence said more than any speech could. The world had finally seen her, and in seeing her, it had glimpsed the enduring power of patience, discipline, and moral clarity. She had walked through life carrying burdens unseen, yet here, in the stillness of acknowledgement, she felt the lightness of justice finally recognized. The soldiers began to disperse, but their demeanor had changed. There was a new respect, a deeper understanding that the quiet heroes among them were not merely colleagues, but pillars of unwavering integrity. Even the youngest recruits, who had barely grasped the weight of their own responsibilities, felt the subtle lesson: courage is not always loud. Recognition is not always immediate, but integrity is eternal. As she walked slowly away from the courtyard, M82 slung over her shoulder. Elise felt the familiar pulse of duty still present, the quiet readiness that had defined her entire career. Yet, there was something different in her steps today. A weight had lifted, not because she sought recognition, but because the world had finally acknowledged the truth she had always carried in silence. She paused briefly, glancing back at the general and the assembled officers. No words were exchanged, but a mutual understanding passed between them, a bond forged not by rank or ceremony, but by recognition of unwavering courage and moral clarity. The lesson was clear. Respect earned through action is more powerful than authority granted by title. The snow glistened around her as she disappeared into the shadowed edges of the base, leaving behind a courtyard forever changed. The story of silent courage, of unwavering discipline, and of moral victory would be remembered by those who had witnessed it, passed down to new recruits, whispered among colleagues, and engraved in the hearts of all who understood what true heroism demands. And for Elise Harper, the sniper who had always operated in the quiet, invisible spaces of the battlefield, it was enough. Recognition had come, but it was not the destination. It was a confirmation of a life lived with courage, honor, and unshakable moral integrity. She had not sought glory, yet she had earned a legacy that would inspire generations to come. She turned toward the horizon, the morning sun reflecting faintly off her uniform, and thought of those who had been lost, those who had been saved, and those yet to come. In her mind, she whispered a silent vow to continue, to endure, and to act with integrity, for the work of true heroes is never finished. And in that quiet reflection, the lesson lingered for all who had watched: courage is silent, heroism is often unseen, and respect, when earned, carries a weight that no rank or title can ever rival. Wherever you are watching from today, remember her story. Remember that heroes walk among us, often unnoticed, carrying burdens we may never see. Comment below with your thoughts on Elise's journey, share this story to honor those who serve silently, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate courage, integrity, and the quiet power of human resilience.